everyone. Here we are in week 10. In this video, I'm going to go through our last art unit, contemporary artwork. So again, this is our last unit, module 10, contemporary art. And when we say contemporary art, that word can be confusing for some people. Really, we're going to think of this as being art created at the end of the 20th century and into the start of the 21st century. But where that confusion comes from is that people will use the word differently when we go between literature and art. Technically, contemporary really means existing, occurring, or living at the same time. So some people will say, well, the viewer was alive at the time that the art was created, or the artist is still alive. So where you kind of draw that line for who's occurring or living at the same time is where it gets a little bit confusing. But again, you can think of this as end of the 20th century, start of the 21st century. And some of our artists will have been people who are alive during the other periods, such as the modern art period. So a little bit of overlap there. So again, people who were alive in the 1970s could experience modern art and then are now perhaps creating art during the contemporary period. But you're going to see that there's quite a difference between modern art and the contemporary art we're going to see in this slideshow here. Now here I have a quote about what makes contemporary artwork unique. If you'd like to pause the PowerPoint or pause this video and look at this, you can, or you can come back to the PowerPoint later since it will be in Canvas. But this just kind of goes over, this is from art21.org, just kind of goes over some of the things that make the contemporary art unique from the movements that came before it. Some of the ideas that can be expressed in contemporary art are technology, globalization, identity politics, politics in general, culture, and feminism. And some of these are concepts that weren't really around as we know them today during some of the other periods that we've talked about in this class. So technology, for instance, is different today than it was 50 to 100 or a couple hundred years ago, right? What we think of as being technology is going to be different. So when we hear the word technology, a lot of us today probably think of things like our phones or our computers, different things like that, the internet. So these are all things that come into play today that can influence our artists and also how they make art. That's going to be one of the other differences as well. The ways that we create what we consider art are changing. So our first section of contemporary art that we're going to look at is street art. And you've probably heard street art referred to as graffiti before, but street art is kind of our more, I won't say technical, but kind of the more proper name given to graffiti sometimes. So mediums include spray paint, stickers, and posters. Sometimes we also refer to this as urban art because it's art that's being put up on walls in urban environments as opposed to in an art studio or on a canvas like traditional art or independent public art. Street art often appears on buildings, but can also be found on other surfaces. So it doesn't have to be on a wall outside, let's say. It can be on something else that's out in public. And while many forms of street art existed before the 21st century, it's gained more acceptance and even popularity in recent years. So before, people would see graffiti as just being vandalism, and now people are seeing it more favorably. So people are liking the street art. There's street art pieces that have sold for quite a bit of money. So there's an artist we're going to talk about a little bit later called Banksy, who you've probably heard of. Banksy has painted things on people's like fences before, and then someone will remove that piece and try and sell it as artwork. So the relationship between the artist and the art and the viewer is really evolving with street art. So our first example here, this is some street art in New York City. You can see that there are several different artists based on the styles here. Several different artists have contributed to this. And so it makes kind of this mosaic and kind of public conversation of what's going on in the art scene. So different styles, different voices are all able to contribute to this piece. So to some people, this may look somewhat chaotic and maybe they don't favor that. But to other people, this again could be a blend of all the different kind of art styles out there and be something that really shows us a more diverse picture of the art scene. We've got another piece here. This is also street art, but this is from Kiev, Ukraine. And we've got this elephant. And if you look at the little thought bubble there, there's a cartoonish elephant with wings on. So this elephant is thinking about flying. It may remind you a little bit of the movie Up, perhaps. But we've got a lot of color here being added to a building that otherwise may have seemed a little bit drab. So bringing some brightness in. This next piece is street art from Dublin, Ireland. And it says in the line there, "We are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars." So we've got, again, something that could be seen as kind of drab, just a gray brick wall here, and someone has added this kind of life to it with all of these butterflies. So encouraging people to kind of dream, to look up at the stars. So another piece of street art here. This is a piece in France. And when you have very large pieces like this, very detailed pieces, these are things that people are going to be commissioning. So we don't have someone just sneaking over to the building and getting up on a platform and saying, I'm going to paint this bird. There's usually more that goes into it. So we've got, again, a different relationship with the artist and the viewer than we've had in the past with some of the street art. Not all of it is random. Now here we get to our first Banksy piece. In the case of Banksy, it's a little bit different. Banksy's not asking anyone for permission to go paint these pieces wherever he's putting them. There's different theories about who Banksy really is, but Banksy is a pseudonym. It's kind of like a stage name that this artist goes by or is referred to. We know that he's based somewhere in the UK. Again, there's theories about who he could be based on where the artwork pops up and the style and everything, but it's kind of this little mystery in the art world. So here we have the saying, follow your dreams, and then something has been put over it to say canceled. So we have a man here with a paintbrush. Maybe he was trying to paint Follow Your Dreams. Maybe he's put the canceled sign over it. Because he has those rolls under his arm, it's more likely that he has unfurled this canceled sign over that. And this image kind of evokes different feelings from different people. So some people may feel that the saying "follow your dreams" has been overused, and so they see putting "canceled" over it as maybe a bit of a reality check. For some people, it's a little bit serious. And here, because of the kind of simplicity of it, we don't really know what side Banksy falls on here. Is this supposed to be more satirical? Is it very somber? So how the viewer looks at it is really more important here than what the artist's intent was, because we don't have more context to it. So however you interpret the scene, that's okay. Here we have a little bit of a lighter piece, I'll say, despite there being flames on it. So there was a contest at a primary school, and this is like a grade school, basically. You can think of like elementary school students in England. They had this contest to name one of their school buildings. So education is a little bit different in the UK than it is here. So while a school will have like a proper name, different school buildings or parts of the school may have other specialized names. So for this one building, the students voted to name it, and they wanted to name it Banksy. And so Banksy heard about this. It would have been in the papers, would have been announced, and he came by and painted this on the side of it. So we have a child, and the child is drawn like a stick figure or painted like a stick figure. So childlike here, with a house in the background and flowers. So he's kind of mimicking the children's style of artwork. And then we have this flaming tire that's hyper realistic. Now, if you're wondering why would he paint that, why have a tire there? Well, the game that the child's playing is reminiscent of an old game in the UK and in the colonies in the US as well, where someone would have a hoop and they would push the hoop with a stick and try and keep it rolling and balance it. So he's kind of harkening back to that game with this. So referring to a very old game with this image. And he's also showing to the kids in a way the possibility for progression, that so that a lot of people start out when they're little drawing stick figures like this, drawing very simplistic figures, and yet he's also been able to make the tire look super realistic. So he's showing them that even if they're starting with basic drawing, they too can become really accurate artists later on. And if you hear some noise in the background during this video, we are almost to the end, but one of my dogs is snoring, so I apologize if there's a little background noise. Our next one here, also a Banksy, so this one is called Mobile Lovers, and this one people often see as being commentary on how people are so attached to their phones these days. So we have a couple who is embracing, and yet their faces are being illuminated by each other's screens. So we've got their arms around each other, but holding up the screens and really not engaging with each other. So some social commentary there on being maybe too attached to our phones and not paying attention to our personal relationships. We're going to have a few examples next year of superstroke art, and this is a style that originated in South Africa. It can be painted in other parts of the world, but the kind of movement is mainly focused in South Africa. And there's actually a manifesto that was written in 2008 that explains the criteria for creating superstroke art. When people hear the word manifesto, they may have different connotations or associations with that word. It's not necessarily a bad thing. The manifesto is just basically a list of guidelines for what they wanted the superstroke art to embody, how they wanted people to paint it, and that sort of thing. So if you're interested, once you see these paintings, feel free to look up that manifesto for superstroke art. The artist we're going to look at, who is one of the founders of this movement, is a piece by Conrad Bow here. So Bow is one of the people who wrote the manifesto for superstroke art. There are other people in the community who also try and mimic this style, but he's really one of the founders of it. And so you can see that there's kind of these thick lines. There are some details in the faces of the people. We have a name on the building above them there, but the art style is mainly focusing on how those brush strokes are made. So superstroke often having these thick lines in different places, often having very dark colors. Here's another one also by Conrad Bow. So here we have some sort of buffalo or cow, and we've got his horns on top. They're kind of blending into the background. We can see part of his body kind of becoming part of the background. So this one a little bit more obviously has that superstroke style of having very thick lines there, and you can kind of see where some of those lines have dried or where another stroke has come through. We'll go on to another artist now. This is moving away from that super stroke style, but also still considered somewhat contemporary. So this piece is from 1997. This is Forgotten People by Godfrey Blow. And we can see that the use of color is somewhat limited in this painting. So we've got the buildings, what appear to be churches and maybe factories in the background are in lighter, are in yellow colors, maybe more optimistic. That might be what you think of those. And then the people who are being forgotten, whether you think that's the people in the foreground or the background, are in very gray tones. So gray, white, black, a little bit more monochrome. In their faces, the people in the background, their faces are not as detailed. So when viewing this, people may wonder who is being forgotten. Is it the people in the front or the people in the background? Are the people who are in the foreground moving away from the thoughts and lifestyle of the other people and maybe trying to start new traditions or a new way of life? And so they have to forget the people they're leaving. So these are the thoughts that people kind of have when they're looking at this. If you interpreted it differently, that's okay. This may make you think of our most recent reading when we were looking at Exit West and talking about how when we move on, if we leave a town or a country, we sometimes kind of forget people in a way. Not that you forget their names or who they are or their significance to you, but you kind of have to move on with your own life and not be as concerned with what they're doing. We're going to go on here to Portrait of the Artist as an Old Man. And this is a play on a book title, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. So a bit of an illusion there. And so this is a self-portrait of Godfrey Blow, and you can see it's a little bit meta because he has more paintings behind him there. We've got one that looks a little bit like perhaps a gargoyle, a little statue type figure, and then the other side, a graveyard at a church. So some very kind of serious imagery here, and it may make you think because of the positioning of those two paintings, if you've ever seen maybe in a cartoon or something where a character has a devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other. That's sometimes what people associate with this, is that he has these two images on each side of him, maybe considering the kind of duality of human nature that we have, good and bad in all of us. When we look at this, we can see that it is somewhat realistic, but not going for hyper-realism, not trying to be super realistic. It's not supposed to look like a photo. It's just kind of how he sees himself, perhaps. So the artist sitting at a table, not looking out at the viewer, kind of not giving that interaction, but looking off into the distance. We can see that his fingers and his arm look somewhat gnarled, so maybe representing the pain and things that he's undergone in order to create his artwork, that it does take a toll on his body. If you're someone who has done a lot of crafts or different things with your hands, you may have had some pain, something like carpal tunnel before, or as people get older, sometimes they have arthritis. So there are these different things that can be a kind of internal pain that he is now making more visual, kind of more explicit to the viewer here with how he's holding himself. We're going to go on to another artist here. So again, still contemporary. This one's from 2012. This is Self-Portrait with Daughter. So kind of cute image here. Again, not going for a portrait styling, but kind of giving a artist's interpretation of how they would like to view this scene. So this is by Billy Childish. His real name is Stephen Hamper. He's another artist who's using a pseudonym. So he uses a name for his work as an artist, and then can kind of have his real name for his personal life. So here's a painting of him with his daughter, and his artwork reminds some people of Van Gogh. So we'll see if you see that similarity. Here's another one. And this one is Man, Woman Leaning on a Boom, also by Billy Childish. And so he's painted these people who are on a boat. There's another boat in the distance there. Again, not going for really realism, but playing around with forms, with use of color, and kind of going against what we might expect someone to do here. So really playing with convention. And lastly, we're going to get into internet and post-internet art. This originated in the 2000s. It explores culture and society in a world with internet, so with internet access. And the internet is viewed as a tool to create art. So if you're wondering if memes can be considered art, yes, to some people they would be. So we've got just one example here. It's called Image Objects by Artie Verkant from 2011. And when students look at this, I've had different answers from people as far as what it reminds them of. So different kinds of art they've seen before, or different images online, or different tools, and even things like paint. And some people are kind of bothered that it's considered artwork. But again, we're reaching a point in time in society when so many things can be considered art that it's harder to put labels on things, to put them into just one group of categories, or to limit them to time period in the same way that we used to. So with that, I'm going to wrap off this PowerPoint on artwork. So again, this is our contemporary art, our last artwork section for the semester. I hope you liked some of those pieces. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to shoot me an email or a Canvas message, and have a good rest of your week.